A word to the wise, we are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory. If you aren't caught up with us this week, that would be through chapter 12 of The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson. I know that I messed it up last week. I know that I just messed it up in the recording right before this, and PJ went, "What book?" like a little pigeon in the background trying to make sure that I didn't mess it up. Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm a pigeon.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran novice readers like. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
I'm not actually a pigeon. I don't know why I said that. That was a lie. I feel badly about that. My name is PJ, but I think you know that already.
PJ, I know that you aren't drinking because you have to wake up very early in the morning and commute to your new, it's not really commuting to your new job, but commuting to a secondary location that is many hours away.
It is commuting to a new job. It just won't be a consistent daily commute.
Right. I prefer to call it a secondary location.
Yep.
So we didn't take our precursory Devil's Cut shot because you're not drinking ultimately on this episode, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I'm taking mine now, so good day.
Cheers.
Woo.
Mm-hmm.
All right, mezcal. Cool.
Ooh.
With that, today, did you have something to say, motherfucker?
No.
Okay. Today is our second episode discussing The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about chapters 5 through chapters 12. But before we do that, let's talk about what we're drinking.
I got some water.
You got some water?
I did make myself a cocktail and then thought better of it and gave it to Kaylin. So Kaylin is drinking... Oh, I didn't think of a good name for it when I decided I wasn't going to drink it. But it is kind of a margarita. Take on a margarita. It is 2 ounces of mezcal, 1 ounce of hibiscus liqueur, or no, 3/4 of an ounce of hibiscus liqueur, 1 ounce of rosemary simple syrup, and the juice of 1 lime, all shaken and served with a lime wedge.
Without talking to each other, we made a remarkably similar cocktail.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I made, what would you call it? Did you try it? I assume you took a sip. Like
I didn't even take a sip of it. No, I have no idea how it tastes.
Wow. I mean, good for you. Are you only drinking straight plain water? You're not having any fun like LaCroix Pure or anything?
Oh, I have one. One sec.
That's what I thought. You need to have something cool. Come on. Them's the rules.
I have a LaCroix Guava Sao Paulo.
Ooh, fun.
It looks like that.
It does. For everyone listening to the show, it looks like that.
It is pink
for everyone
with
watching the show. No,
red
you aren't.
And green accents.
Fair enough. You can Google LaCroix Sao Paulo. PJ, I am having a bow and arrow tonight.
You're a bow and arrow.
Okay. Bow and arrow is kind of like a spin on a sour, basically. 1 ounce bourbon, 1 ounce Macau. I literally just took the shot no more than, a minute ago. Okay. So 1 ounce bourbon, 1 ounce of mezcal, 3/4 ounces of lime, and a 1/2 ounce of cane sugar shaken. Very good. A little bit of ground nutmeg on top. Fantastic.
Nice.
It's great. It hits all those notes. So, like I said, we're similar. We both went to mezcal, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Without any consultation. Oh, I forgot. There's also an ounce of pineapple juice in this.
Nice. I was going to say it looks remarkably yellow for...
Yes. I totally forgot the pineapple juice. Yep. Yeah. Cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Pretty good.
You following that up with anything, or?
Well, the plan was, as we had discussed earlier in the day, to do a drink and a shot because we knew that we had a ton to get through and we didn't want to go off the rails in any direction accidentally. So, no, I do have tea per usual and water, of course, to follow that up. But no, I have no back half beverage that is of any consequence.
All right.
Cool. All right.
Very nice.
So with that, before we talk about the chapters, PJ, how'd you feel about this week's reading? Where'd you land?
I think this is really hitting a stride. Obviously, it's the second quarter of this book where you'd expect it to. I'm still not used to like tackling this much of a book all at once, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But it felt snappy. It felt important and relevant, and got a whole lot of information. And I guess that's just kind of what should be expected of the second quarter of an entire fucking book.
Yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about this in our Devil's Cut, but just to bring it to people's attention, I normally don't think I would pace the book quite this quickly. I think I would probably split this week and next week into like the end of this week and the beginning of next week into its own episode, and then the end the end like half and full episode I'd split in half basically and do that there. I think that this book needs 5 episodes in theory. However, we were hard pressed to meet this deadline that we have to get these all out by the time the Lost Metal rolls around, so that we can start that in a timely fashion to kind of keep up and to do something fun and unique. And I don't know that it's I don't know that it was a high that we will ever chase again, because this in particular feels much more high pressure. Like we cannot mess up or miss anything, and, or 1 week off and everything else. So very excited, but I do agree with you. I feel like in normal circumstances, we would have taken an extra week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should have. But
yeah.
Hindsight 2020, huh?
Correct. We are here now. So, with that, without further ado, let's get into this breakdown here. We start with Chapter 5. Chapter 5, Wax is stirred by what he sees at the train station after he examines his package that he got from Renette at the end of last week with the cords in it and the gun. After managing to get Sterris's nose out of her book, she explains that Ellendale is set up as an economic powerhouse from its very foundation, taxing what feels to the people both ways, as well as being a hub that has a stranglehold on trade. This is a really interesting setup and kind of question to be asking inside of this book, and we'll definitely talk about this over the course of this chapter. But what was your initial reaction to kind of bringing economics into the whole thing?
I mean, if you know me, you know I'm a real big taxes and tariffs guy. Just super, super into that. So I was very happy to learn that Ellendale has such a stranglehold on the surrounding region and effectively holds them hostage for all of their goods and services. That was very cool for me. But in general, this was super, super intricate and well thought out and well described, and is a different aspect of the world that we hadn't really seen a whole lot, even in the first series. So getting it all fleshed out like that was satisfying for me to read, I think. But fuck taxes and tariffs.
I think that this book does a really good job of making that compelling without just feeding it to us, if that makes sense. Like, I think one of the interesting components of this series to date so far, as we've read it, is that it kind of makes the function of Ellendale and the Industrial Revolution a villain in the story. It is in its own backdrop. It is consistently and persistently a problem, right? Like the engine of the city was kind of the thing in Shadows of Self that was a really big deal. Like the city itself being corrupt and people feeling the need to unionize, but then being dispersed by our hero Wax. Even now, given there's some pretenses under those riots that are, they're being forced by Palm and some other people that are involved there, but I mean the undercurrent's there and it's very real. And then this just emphasizes it and gives it a reason to stretch outside of the city and make it kind of a bigger region problem.
Yeah, the industrialization is simultaneously a villain, like you're describing, but also not being pushed far enough, according to Harmony. Like he's coddled them too much so that they haven't expanded their understanding of technology enough, in his opinion. So like that's a weird dichotomy.
Yeah. And I guess I think that actually plays into it a little bit because they haven't moved as quickly. What they've done predominantly is just garner continuous wealth, right? Which I think is part of the problem. And like, as such, Ellendale has taxed the ever-living shit out of the outlying regions without showing progress that might be incumbent upon doing that. Basically, we're just going to continue to make money, ad nauseum, and we're not going to see any changes in society besides whose pocketbooks are being padded.
Mo money.
And so then you could kind of, if you think about it, you can kind of look at the set and be like, okay, I can see where you're coming from too. And it does give it a little bit more intrigue than I think the primary plot does a good job of exposing. Like this is all like undercurrents to everything and all of the underlying societal issues, but it hasn't come to the forefront yet necessarily.
Right.
So, but it is clearly becoming a problem. Cool. Yeah. There's this really interesting note here that Sterris has been voting by proxy for Wax. And I thought that this was interesting because Wax just keeps himself very distant from house politics in general and at large. But it wanders away from the house politics and towards compliments from Wax to Sterris. And it's a heartwarming little moment between the two. The sort of moment in the exchange of, but I am dull, and the nonsense line in particular are wonderful examples. And something that we see kind of repeat throughout this week is that there's a lot of affirmation kind of both ways inside their relationship, even though they're both also self-deprecating.
Yeah, their relationship really evolves this section, starting off at this point, that note that you mentioned, her calling herself dull and him refuting that idea. Going back to the voting by proxy thing, I remembered that he was like, obviously he's the head of the house, and there's some societal power that comes with that. I had forgotten or hadn't realized, I guess, that there was actually a like voting position that he sits in, like that he holds as this head of household. I thought it was less explicit that the heads of households were still running this city. I thought it was more kind of undercurrent, like more understated than that.
No, it's very directly kind of stated, although I think that, again, this is something that isn't made as big of a deal. It's more of an undercurrent thing, right? Mm-hmm. Where I think that it would make for a very great overcurrent, because I think you can very directly now, considering the fact that we're talking about like the outer regions feeling, suppressed by the city and whatnot, and feeling like they have no other option to like ship things between each other. You can very clearly see the sort of seeds of, I don't want to call it like, you can see the similarities that accidentally sprung up between the two societies in the way that they divided up power. One being, an elected official, but the houses still rule. I mean, it's, they didn't really get rid of the generational wealth problem or anything like that. It seemed everyone who was important ended up being important again.
Yeah, they didn't fucking touch it.
They just added their names to the list. I mean, which is really...
Yeah.
All those revolutionaries would be really sad if they saw that was the result of their action.
They'd be really upset.
Yeah. They'd be really angry.
They'd be pretty pissed.
Except for maybe Set. He'd probably be okay with it. But
yeah.
I wouldn't call him necessarily revolutionary to begin with. So.
No, I was just going to make that comment. Yeah. I don't think so.
He's just there. But I love the little note here that comes shortly thereafter on the books and accounting. I'm shocked it's taken Brandon this long to work an accountant character into his stories, as he always talks fondly about his mom as an accountant, and that he talks often, talking about some extra textual stuff, as he, unlike most writers, has a background in accounting as opposed to a lot of different creative functionalities, or like parents who are creatives or things like that. And because his mom was an accountant, he thinks of himself as a writer and a business person. And so this is the first time that it feels like that's really collided in big part in these books. And, I don't want to say it's not compelling, because it is, but it's also, he somehow manages to make it not boring while still adding some intrigue and interest to what's effectively numbers and counting beans.
Math.
And that's not to say that like you can't have that in a story, right? Like we've talked about before. We were obsessed with the sort of the way that economics would be handled in the Red Rising universe post a rebellion, you know, and we thought it long and hard about the sort of Mistborn boxing system and how much money that actually was worth in the beginning versus how much money they're burning in ATM. You know, we had lots of different like small equations that are fun and interesting, but never accounting or bookkeeping specifically, like never something so mundane, but would definitely be happening inside the world.
Well, there's an entire color in the Red Rising series, like dedicated to it.
That's fair.
So we get it. We just don't get the perspective that we do here.
It exists, yeah, but its perspective is different than, you know, something being accounted for.
Yeah.
It's silly when we're talking about accountants.
I think it makes total sense to be included here, though. This matches very well Sterris's character, and also them sharing this conversation and these sort of pouring over of the books. It further defines their relationship between Wax and Sterris that we've been seeing since, well, the last question, I guess. But throughout this entire section, this is another point in that sort of building of relationship. It feels fresh. It feels different for some reason. Like it feels like they're building a relationship here, as opposed to acting like they're in one.
I think that that's a great way to put it, is it does feel like they're building a relationship and that they're actually trying to make it work, if that makes sense, versus before there was never even an attempt more than a passing glance because of the contract. I mean, there were some things, right? There were some moments and there were some things that led us to feel like, okay, we can dance with this a little bit, but we're not fully bought into, you know, the whole thing. So I do want to, at the very least, mention, since we're talking about the books and the scene and everything else, is that the book that Sterris is reading in this moment that she's so absorbed in that she can't break away from is a book about anatomy and sex. And it's a very interesting breakdown from Brandon, and she kind of explains her nervousness about sex, even to the point of having gone out of her way to interview some prostitutes of whom felt protective of her because she was a lady of the house. And like, kind of, I can imagine how that scene would go down with Sterris and some women being like, can somebody tell me? And they'd be like, they'd kind of just like giggle, you know. You can totally understand exactly all of those conversations and her awkwardness approaching them.
Didn't she say they like kind of shied away and like went away from her after they learned who she was?
Yeah, that's kind of, I think that that's an extra layer of like prudishness that they don't, prudishness is the wrong word. There's an extra layer of distance that's applied then to what's going on between them or their conversations. So.
Yeah, because I felt like that conversation with the prostitutes came out as something not protective, but more another level of frustration for her because she didn't get what she was seeking ultimately.
It definitely was frustration for her, but I believe they literally say that they were like protecting her from it.
Okay.
That's more my point, is like they felt after they found out who she was that they couldn't do that, like they shouldn't do that, like that wasn't their place to do, was the context in which I had seen it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
without going back and like directly reading it, I can buy into that.
Yeah, because it was very much like they didn't want to interact with her anymore, and that was definitely frustrating with her. So yeah, but all this conversation circles around the arrangement on the whole and her duty to have a child, and this leads to a very kind of honest conversation between these two. You know, we've obviously been talking about their relationship, but what do you make of the sort of the intimate connotation of their relationship?
It's strangely cute.
Okay,
and I know that's a weird way to describe it, but I think it's they're confined right now. They're on this train. They're confined with each other, and they are just kind of making the relationship work. And it's a lot of like weird cuteness in unexpected places. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. Just this, it's the coy looking at the book that she's reading and she's like avoiding it. It's a little, I don't want to say immature, because I don't think that's the right term for it, but naive, I guess, when it comes to the actual like sexual nature of the relationship. And Wax doesn't really do much to change those feelings. Like, there's no resolution there, but somehow it still feels okay.
Yeah. It's not exactly addressed. Instead, they kind of just skate by it for the most part. Outside of the fact that he does say that, like, that's not all you are, right? And then brings up the contract, and it's kind of, again, like we're saying, it's kind of loosely skated around without being directly without confronting that very directly. That's where he gets into the metaphor about the cord and the ball and kind of the new Renette thing, and shows off the hooks for plot reasons later. But this is the most literal Chekhov's gun I've ever seen in fiction.
Absolutely. But it was also useful in the description.
Two Chekhov's guns that are the most useful I've ever seen in fiction.
I feel like the point that he's making of like the tension on the string and everything.
Yeah.
It would have been stronger if we had seen the use of the item first, and then we like get it as an example of like a metaphor for human nature. So you're right. It is very Chekhov's gun-y. But I mean, at least it had a function, you know? It was something.
Well, and Chekhov's gun, for the record, isn't a bad thing necessarily. What I mean is that Brandon had to show how the balls worked somewhere, and this had to be the scene that he set it up, you know, because it didn't happen beforehand. So it couldn't be used as a metaphor later. He's doing like the inverse of what you're thinking he should do, which is very funny to me.
Right. Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, all in all, that's how you felt about it. A little bit corny, a little bit.
Yeah. There's the comment that he makes about it was actually like kind of profound, but also kind of corny when she like talks about him being a lawman and him saying that like he's there to break boundaries, or that human nature is to break boundaries instead of like maintain them, and like tying that to the contract, all that, but corny, but still well said.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Some cross section of all those things.
I have to put this out there, but headcanon, Brandon writing this part. First draft, sometimes you're just trying to get an idea on the page. It doesn't need to make sense in the context. A character might not even say something that way, but you use like a metaphor. I imagine Brandon is writing this and can't think of anything in the moment. And so he writes, like tangled headphones in your pocket. And when you pull them out, they're really confusing. And so you need this widget that does the thing for you. So then you don't have tangled headphones in your pocket. And I could not get it out of my head when I was thinking about the chords specifically. And why are they called chords? Like what?
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
they're like braided, like nylon, because it's not wire, right? It's not metal. It's not metal itself.
Correct. But even then, you could refer to it as rope. Like nylon rope is a thing.
Yeah, but cord is different than rope and exists.
True. I'm not
saying that you're wrong. I'm just trying to like find a rationalization.
I was just curious, because I'm always curious on definitions from time to time. The definition of a cord is literally rope, which is very funny.
Well, there's egg on my face.
There's an important clarification though, that is a flexible rope. So
not one of them stiff ropes.
Not one of them stiff ropes. I'm totally cool with it. I just definitely imagined headcanon. Brandon first draft couldn't think of the metaphor at the time. Wrote down like tangled headphone wires.
I believe it.
Yeah. All right, so we get to the end of this chapter with Wax willingly and dutifully burying his nose deep into a boring accounting book. I say boring, of course, for him, but you know, it comes up later. It's fun, kind of.
All glory to math.
Did you do any too drunk to do math this weekend?
No, we didn't drink to forget math.
All right.
Unfortunately.
Just had to check. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
With that, let's get into chapter 6 here. We open this chapter with Marasi and begin to explore both some of the interviews with R'hllor, as well as the texts left behind by the Lord Mistborn. These are two very different bits here, but I wanted to pull at your thoughts on both of them. What do you think R'hllor could be referring to as this beast? How do you feel about Spook's seemingly light turn towards darkness, even if it's practical in a way that he experimented with hemalurgy?
I'll address the Spook one first. Every leader that we've had in these stories so far has had some turn towards what we would perceive as darkness. And it's always for the betterment of humanity or the planet as a whole at the expense of the immediacy and the expense of the people immediately surrounding him. So it is strange, but maybe telling at the inevitability of that Spook isn't an exception here, but the means are a little bit different. Like comparing him to the Lord Ruler, to Elend. I guess those are the three main ones where we really get Kelsier, I guess.
A little bit of Kelsier, yeah. Kelsier actually did right at the nearer to the end. He turned in the last moment, but
yeah. As far as this beast, it's kind of ominous and scary, and I don't know what to think of it. My thoughts are, I think it's even mentioned, like related to the creatures that Wax ran into before that we talked about last book or last episode. But
the hemalurgic constructs, that's what you're talking about? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Those were in last book, but yeah.
Was that last book? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. I think that there's definitely something there. I mean, the beast definitely seems curious, and it's given a lot of attention in R'hllor's eyes and mind. And then on top of that, you have, that's kind of a bigger question that's just kind of out there that we don't really have an answer to. I think we can interrogate the leftover from the Lord Mistborn and Spook a little bit more here. Yeah, it's interesting to me as well that the metal, like we're saying, the darker turn, right, is that he's spiking these people at the end of their lives to take their abilities with hemalurgy, which voluntarily, like this, none of this is necessarily, they have to offer it up, but ultimately kind of explaining it to them, that's very, very specifically, like, how do you feel about that interaction? Like, I definitely understand the practicality of what you're seeking in the answer, but
yeah, the specifics, that's pretty fucked. Just trying to wrestle with the ethics of that. And that's where that sort of intention comes in that, like, it's intended to betterment, like to usher in betterment for the rest of society by creating defenders with better abilities. But that could very easily go wrong too. Like, you're still dealing with sentient mortal people that could potentially have changes of mind, and suddenly you have a super killer that's no longer it can all go wrong, and it's really playing with fire. But just the actual ethics of spiking and killing people at end of life, it's not a new idea, like not a new concept when it comes to like human experimentation, and it doesn't make it okay. Like,
yeah, right.
It's still really fucky, but at least there's consent there, so that's a saving grace.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That is, in my head, the saving grace of this, at the very least, is that we can say, hey, it's not like Spook was doing it against people's will. It doesn't completely taint him, but it definitely adds a veneer, and it adds a question about, the path that Spook was on post Era 1.
Right.
So, all right. Moving on from that. So, Marasi is pulled from her interrogative and investigative mindset into a distraction caused again by Wayne, of course, the king of distractions. And I find this conversation that they have very fascinating. Wayne is obviously out and borrowing people's accents while conversing with them, but it's what follows that really gets me. Marasi's non-reaction to his statements really drive this sort of solemnity out of Wayne, and I think pulls him down to earth in a big way for all of his bluster. But it's also a moment for Marasi where she's seeking some separation from what has come before. And in this case, that is the baggage of Waxilium Ladrian. She wants to make her own name and have her own identity and notoriety. I guess, like, what'd you make of this whole kind of moment that happens between the two of them here in the train car, in the dining car?
I felt like there was a big shift in general for the entire vibe of the story and these two characters, kind of the way they live on the page a little bit. There's a bit of a screeching to a halt sort of feeling to this whole thing. Wayne kind of has a reality check to a certain degree. Like he's been very comical and almost cartoonish with his interactions up until now, and seeing it just kind of get punched in the dick and seeing his face fall brings his entire character back to the ground a little bit for me. And Marasi at the same time is frustrated and just gains a lot of depth here. I don't know how to describe it beyond that.
I mean, I think gaining a lot of depth kind of is a good way of summing up all of that happens, right? Like, she kind of declares her intent here, right? Which is that she wants to be known on her own. And you can kind of see her start to break away, not only from like Wayne's shenanigans and like put him on the ground right where he belongs, but at the same time, she also is in her own head, I think, finally taking the axe to Wax in her brain and being able to be like, okay, this was supposed to be my mission. I could have totally done this, and I can prove myself, and I'm more than capable. And it sets her up to be her own kind of investigator, which I think is great, so that she can actually break off into her own.
Yep. Yeah. Putting the shovel to the grindstone, as it were.
That is definitely what it is. The shovel to the recently upturned dirt, like any good investigator does, digs graves. So yeah, I really enjoy that scene and kind of the moment. Screeching to a halt is a great way to put it. Like, it's truly on a train that's rolling forward. We have the brakes pulled in a fast way, and it's great to see Wayne's character kind of grounded in a significant sense. I also have a question for you here. Wayne is always charging Wax for things. He's charging things to the room, given the fact that he's kind of this obscenely wealthy house lord. And while I don't see anything immediately bad in this, I don't think there's any ill will. I think it's been played off previously as, well, it's his house and he let me stay here so I can take things. It's in moments like these where I just have to like ask, or I think about that honor code that Wayne has for trading things. What do you think he's trading Wax all the time for the shit that he buys on his dime?
I have a couple options here.
Okay.
One is his time. I don't know if he's actually being paid. Like, is he on Wax's payroll? Or is this like his payment? That's an option. The other is that Wayne genuinely doesn't recognize the concept of credit as value, so therefore he's trading nothing.
I think I like answer one. I think that's where I kind of go with it too. Is it feels very unclear that he's being paid for any of the work that he's doing or anything like that. So he could genuinely be on his payroll, but even if he is, it's probably not enough in his own eyes versus the amount of work that he does. And at the same time, in Wax's eyes, he's probably accounting for all of the different expenses as a part of Wayne's payroll, in addition to whatever his base pay is, like incidences, that are incurred on the company credit card, basically. Yeah, that's kind of the way that I picture it. So I think I agree with you on option one. I do find option two very funny, though, that he just doesn't understand credit. Which I mean, kind of holds true if you think about it.
And it could be that he understands it, but just doesn't believe in it.
Acknowledge, yes. Fair point. Yeah. I'm with that. I just, for whatever reason, it struck me this time when he orders a whole bottle of whiskey on a train, which I can't imagine is cheap.
No, probably not.
No, not at all. He's really picky about what he's drinking here, too. He doesn't want the bubbly that they had at the table behind them when he was talking with the drunk couple that was right there in the dining car. Instead, gets whiskey. So I'm drinking for the whiskey drink.
Cheers.
You sad, sad bastard. All right. So Marasi gets up after Wayne departs, noting the Pathian earring and note that was left for Wax, just in case. He moves back towards the family cart. Wax has just successfully found the lost clips from the chapter before and tosses him the earring and other notes as well. She heads off to bed when suddenly the car seems to be under assault. She screams, and our chapter ends.
Mm-hmm. Is there any description of the handwriting for that note? Is that mentioned?
pretty sure that they don't describe the handwriting, but I'm pretty sure that it is not directly mentioned, but at least obliquely mentioned that it's Vendel who gave it to her. But
okay, gotcha.
Yeah. It's not direct, but I'm pretty sure it says from the Khandra or something like that. So
yeah, that makes sense. I did find it. Well, I was going to posit that it's potential. It was potentially like a direct act of intervention by Harmony himself, but who knows?
Is it not? If the Khandra gives it, like the Khandra are ultimately under Harmony's control, so like it is kind of a direct intervention in its own right.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's not like Harmony's showing up, I guess, in like spirit and body and like handing off an earring, I guess, but it is, you know.
Yeah, that'd be a substantial abuse of power.
Substantial, for sure.
Keep that shit in line, Harmony.
Yeah, who's the arbiter of who gets to use their powers in what way as a god?
Harmony himself. He's got those dueling perspectives that he talks about.
But
he's got.
What if? Okay,
he put training wheels on himself, and he can't take them off because he threw away his tools or something. I don't know.
He put training wheels on himself, and oh man, this joke was dead before I picked it up.
It was.
To quote Wayne later.
I do find this change, this scene with Sterris getting genuinely upset at Wax finding an error to be unexpected, because it's not lighthearted. She seems genuinely like frustrated by this and distressed by it, because I guess it was unplanned. I guess it was not Wax's like stated strengths to find errors, and she had like she takes pride in her adeptness here and didn't catch that one. So we see a little bit of perfection.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's that pride and perfection. I don't know that she's so upset that Wax found it so much as the fact that she didn't, you know, and that she missed it. Yeah.
That could be probably a better way to put it.
Yeah. But I totally agree with you on the concept, right? Is like, it is definitely, to her, it's a very big deal in the moment.
Right.
So with that, we go into chapter 7 here. This scene is just wild, man. I mean, chapter 7 and 8 are predominantly, it's an action scene split between the two chapters, but Wax notes immediately that they're being robbed by men on horseback, which he finds odd. They decouple the rich train car from the rest of them, meaning this private train car that they're on, forcing Wax to use his powers to increase his weight and shove this train car forward in an attempt to keep up. It's a wonderful scene as he then like plants himself on the back of the car and continues to shove it forward, almost like reverse Spider-Man, you know, from Spider-Man 2, and then latches it successfully back up with the train itself. So it literally makes me imagine like a GIF, the Spider-Man GIF of him like pulling the train but running backwards. That's entirely what's going on in my head in this moment.
Yeah, this is a weird scenario for me, but go with me here.
Okay.
This is a very clever use of his twin-born like abilities and how they interact with one another. But is that cleverness earned because Brandon is writing this scenario for those abilities, you know?
That
is an argument that makes all of the storytelling break down anyway. So I have to like take myself out of that train of thought and just say, this is a really cool use of these abilities and how they can interact with one another.
So in the way that I imagine Brandon approaching some of these different things, he didn't start with like this idea of pushing a train car, right? But he thought of a scenario in which he's like, oh, this would be a cool use of these abilities, and then set it up to make it happen. You know what I mean? Which I think is still good storytelling because it's approachable, right? And because we enjoy it, and because it's well told, and because it's exciting to us, right? But at the same time, the scene almost doesn't create enough distance from this is cool to like this is urgent until much later. You know what I mean? Like this doesn't feel like an emergency in a strange way, or this doesn't feel like enough of a freak out in some ways. You have a little bit later in the document that like this was the first time in a while that it felt probably, I mean, since maybe Alloy of Law even, that it really felt like Wax was in trouble. And I definitely agree with that. And I think even at this point in this, I didn't feel like Wax was in trouble. Like, I didn't feel like technically speaking, they would have been fine to wait, in the middle of nowhere, basically, on this car, or to like slowly push it, because they didn't need to take care of the train in the robbery. I mean, their moral sense of duty made them, but it doesn't quite have the emergency urgency that the Spider-Man scene has, where he has to save them. I also hate that I said emergency.
You saw me light up at that one.
I flinched at it too, but I don't. I'm using the Spider-Man 2 scene because that's what happens in my head, but it doesn't have that sort of immediacy that scene has,
right?
And that threat. And I think that's what some of this series lacks at times, not always, but at times. And when it does, oftentimes it puts one of our two female characters at risk more often than our male characters ever feel in danger.
Yeah, that seems pretty accurate, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
What's the name of that trope again?
Like the princess trope? Like the
damsel in distress?
Damsel in distress, yes. That said, I mean, like, Marasi's earning, like, Brandon's addressing it well, but it does, especially that first book, does have a little bit of that. And definitely. Yeah, I guess it's just my thing here is, like, I agree with you in the concept of, like, I had the same thought this time around reading it. Like, is this a necessarily cool scene? Like, did Brandon insert it to be like, look how smart I am at using the system of math that I built? Or did the character feel like it needed to do this? And I think that the character feels right in this moment. I feel like some of that works out. But I'm not going to say it didn't scratch at the back of my brain. And I've had a lot. This is one of those conundrums where I'm like, this is right on that razor edge for me. A or B.
Right.
Yeah. Plot contrivance driving character action. That's kind of what I mean. Yeah. I think that's what we're getting at.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So, but it is very cool, especially the increasing weight and then throwing it all forward. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So all signs, according to Wax, point to this not being a random train robbery, a lack of masks, the choice of horses. Every individual piece of it just feels off to him. He continues down the train, tracking these fools and pushing them off the train variously. It's very funny because he refuses to shoot them a couple of times and then instead throws them off of a moving train, which, okay, buddy.
All right.
Gravity killed them.
That's some Batman vibes right there.
It's some serious Batman vibes. It's some serious college humor bad man vibes. With Pete Holmes just throwing batarangs into people's faces and saying that they're sleeping. Definitely has the same energy to me.
Yeah.
But I do love the way that Brandon gives his texture to the steel bubble here in a really interesting way and intangible, with it rattling the doorknobs as he walks past down the train with it active, because of course it would spin and it would push on other things. We get some of these tweaks in other places, but I just really liked the image of rattling doorknobs as he's passing, and you can visualize that so clearly in like a TV sequence or a movie sequence. Really great. But he's out of steel, shockingly, a little bit after this, and Sterris has some for him, but instead whiskey, it's suspended in fish oil.
It's so fucking gross.
It's so gross.
Hey, at least we don't have to drink for this one.
I think we do have to drink for this one. I'm a solidarity fucker. I'm drinking for it with him out of solidarity.
Okay, fair. Because he wishes it was whiskey?
Yes, because he wishes that it was suspended in whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give it to him. And I have some whiskey in here, so that works out.
Perfect.
Yeah. Anything else on the sort of walk down the train and the Sterris being prepared? I figured this is all action stuff, right? So this
it is. It is very much just kind of moving the scene into the next place it has to be, with some really cool visuals and intriguing things. I guess you mentioned the doorknobs, and yeah, you're right. You could totally see that being a subtle indication in like a TV adaptation that his steel bubble's on, without explicitly like saying it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what's so clever about it, is it would be I feel like one of the tough things to convey about Mistborn without dropping into the first-person POV perspective is going to be something like the steel push and pull lines, right? The iron pull lines and the steel push lines that go out to metals and back. You can do that. You can make that shot look real once or twice without it being too matrixy as they spiral out of you. And so coming up with some real ways of demonstrating that is much more interesting.
Yeah.
I honestly wouldn't be shocked if some of the steel bubble stuff worked its way back into Era 1.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I feel like it would need to.
Mm-hmm. I totally see that happening pretty easily. Maybe not at the beginning, but maybe as to show some savantism and stuff like that, to show growth. But yeah. Anyway, Wax makes his way over a number of the bodies lining the train car on the way to where he assumes the thieves are while confronting an injured guard. A big man. Can we talk about like how that almost read like, what's the type of poetry that has all of those up downs? Oh my God. Why can't I?
I'm not sure.
Sonnet. It's a sonnet that almost read like a sonnet. Wax makes his way over a number of bodies lining the train car on the way to where he assumes the thieves are while confronting an injured guard. Like that has, but especially near the end, that all has like sonnet pacing. That's fucked up. Anyway.
Yeah.
A big man approaches from the back of the train, accompanied by a smaller man with a cane. Oh my God, I did it again. Folks, this is literally an accident. I wrote this afternoon. He gets up to surprise the brute with a small metal cube, lands near him, and his steel vanishes. That's a little bit of a bummer, but okay. Anyway, the point in context being, this is just such an interesting moment, right? And that vanishing, that sucking away, this is something very new. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, it is wildly different than any other metal ability we've seen so far. Though I'm racking my brain for something like this from the previous era that happened and then didn't get resolved or something. I can't remember. It feels like an aluminum grenade is kind of how I think it's being used effectively. Later on, we get mention of it with its runic carvings and its intricacies. That makes me think it's an entirely different metal art in general. One maybe from a different world, maybe from a different god. I don't know.
Well, the cube itself or the metal art, I guess, is where I'm trying to draw the line, because we kind of know from the back of the Ars Arcanum that leechers exist, right? And we even get some speculation on this a little bit later, I think in like chapter 9 or so, saying that it wasn't a leecher, that it came from the cube, right? So aluminum grenade, we'll stick with that for, that purpose. But
I'm talking about the effect from the cube.
Got it. The cube is what feels odd. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
That makes sense. I'm in on that. I just wanted to clarify on the other side of things with the fact that leechers do exist. So, okay, cool. Yeah, it's a really interesting moment where you're just like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And they're using other things like gas throughout the car to like gas, and to give themselves escape and smoke and coughing and masks and everything else a little bit later. So it's just shocking when this cube rolls out because you're expecting, something like a grenade, and it's not. It's instead.
But it is.
Yeah. Instead, it's something else, an allomantic grenade of sorts. So, yeah. We move to Marasi working her magic with her rifle in the back of the car, and she's learned from the last time she had to fire so close to her face, coming fully prepared this time with earplugs. It's a small but great note here that I just really appreciated, the fact that like people are talking around her and she can't hear them, not because she shot too close to her ears this time, but because she's wearing earplugs. Good work. Wear earplugs, kids.
Yep.
And her whole part of this chapter is littered with moments that show her growth. Her line, like statistics say, shut up, is just wonderful. She skates past the wounded and dead between cars, sending for Sterris to potentially bring bandages. Of course, her half-sister is gone, wandering further up the car. But I just love Marasi's growth in this action scene, this moment.
Yeah, I mean, this growth matches and builds upon the growth that we've talked about all book. Does this reach back into the previous book, or is it mostly this book where we've talked about it? I can't recall.
She was definitely beginning to break away, right? Like she was willing to bend the rules a little bit before. So it does set her on an arc, right? It's not as though it's just happened in this book, but she was already starting to register some of these changes in the book before.
Right. Yeah, it's fulfilling to see her character continue that. And I think it feels grounded. It feels real. I like where she's at.
Okay.
Maybe a little heavy-handed with the statistics say shut up thing. But, you know, that's what we come to expect from Brandon, kind of sharing growth through inner monologue. It's a little heavy-handed sometimes. But that's okay.
I mean, it's a symptom of Era 2, right? Era 2 feels almost like, if you think about Era 1 as an urban epic-ish fantasy, it works. This is like, it is an ode to some degree to Westerns, and it also owns that in times with its dialogue, right? In moments where you have the dialogue popping up in these contexts, it gives you, again, I have to reference it, but like, I cannot get Wild Wild West out of my head thinking about this, because there are so many similarly like cheesy lines that are fun. And it's like, this is a fun line because she's constantly repeated it, but it gives it a little bit of character weight by her saying, shut up. It just should have been, it probably should have been something a little bit more substantial than shut up, but shut up fits for the character. So that's fine.
Yep.
Yeah. She would always jump in with statistics say, and, you know, this lends a little bit of that change. So, So we go back to Wax, of whom is being thrown around again by a steel push and brutalized by this large gentleman, of whom we don't know the name of, but the 7-foot-tall man. While he fights back, he's unable to do much against the man, being out of his metals. The man is enjoying this fight, having robbed Wax of his gun belts, when he pulls out Renette's new experimental shotgun. He attempts to shoot Wax, but it knocks him on his ass, meant for someone much physically heavier than even he is. He manages to wrest away the gun belt and metal vial. The two continue to engage when a gun points out, having been lifted. And I love the way that it just kind of like pokes out too. Like Brandon describes it as like a very like weird, not the right person doing this. Of course, it's Sterris, and she's holding the shotgun, and she shoots the brute, clipping him in the arm and sending herself careening off of the side of the train.
The imagery for this is so cartoonish and ridiculous, but I have to admit I love it. Like, it's funny. It's funny. Mm-hmm. I certainly laughed the first time that I read it, and you alluded to it earlier. This is the point where I think that this is kind of the first time we see Wax in trouble, and we actually feel a sense of like, a sense of danger for our boy. And it's nice to see sort of the pause in the action here as something goes wrong, but he's able to get out of the fight itself. I don't know. I feel like it's well paced and well timed, comedic, and stakes are high. I don't know. A lot going on.
That is definitely, you know, we've brought up the Chuck Palahniuk strippers and comedians, and I'm not going to run over that another time for anyone who hasn't heard any of our previous episodes where I've talked about it for a little bit too long. But this does feel like a stripper comedian moment where it's like you built that tension perfectly. We feel that stress in the scene. You can kind of see in the background the solution coming out, and it's the wrong person with the wrong weapon, and it's very funny. I love that you laughed out loud, because I definitely did too this second time, because I was like, man, I don't remember how he gets out of this, and then it happened, and I was like, oh yeah. this whole exchange. But you do feel a lot of that tension, and I do love that here, because as mentioned, it feels like we haven't been too in fear for our characters in a while. Mm-hmm. For our boy, as it were.
Yep.
And he gets, not only does he get the shit kicked out of him, but he can't kick the shit out of this guy. Like, he punches him and hurts his own hand. Like, he's not prepared.
Yeah, there's definitely something going on with this guy too. There's the comments later on about him being Koloss blooded, but his skin tone doesn't match what he should. He's a steel pusher as well. There's some weirdness.
I don't think it's necessarily suggesting that this guy is Koloss blooded, because this is not necessarily Donnie.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But there is something else, it seems, to him. Yeah. It seems like he can steel push. Can he do something else? Does he have another, does he have a metal mind?
Pewter, maybe?
Pewter, yeah. I mean, that would certainly make sense considering what we know about pewter burners. Does that does that mean that he's a twin born with two allomantic capabilities?
Or a mistborn.
Or He's got a hemalurgic spike.
Or there's something entirely different that we can't know about yet.
Or, yeah, we have to speculate about a science system that we don't know things about because of the way that works, because it's not predictable, because it could literally be anything all the time. Okay, moving on. Chapter 8. I'm just kidding. Did you have something?
No, it's just wild speculations. Like, if that cube can simultaneously steal powers, drain metals, but also give them to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, he's fighting his own steel.
We've been talking about investiture and identity quite a bit, so that could make some sense.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that power go? Cool. All right. With that, we get into chapter 8 here. Sterris is falling towards the river. Wax follows, of course, diving after her. He downs the vial. It takes a second, and the power surges in him again. He shoots down, pushing off the tracks above, slamming into Sterris and grabbing her, and pushing on Renette's plot gun into the river below, leaving them hanging just above the water. He dives under with Allomancy to grab it, replacing it with one of the spheres, and then launches them back up to the train itself. The new grappling hook with these triggers works well to do precisely what he had wished it would do in the previous book. And that's kind of cool. Like, there's some cool payoff here.
You gotta love when a plan comes together.
Yeah, right.
I was going to say there's a really great deal of description and sort of science and mechanics that go into this section that I really appreciate. One of which is relying on the viscosity of the water to push against something that's sinking, and how that is effective. Like, you can absolutely tell that there was quite a bit of collaboration with scientists and done in this section to see how things would actually work.
Yeah. And it gives a sense of depth and realism to like how exactly this would happen. It is funny, of course, that it is literally the shotgun that has caused all of these problems throughout this entire train sequence, basically. And so that's why I refer to it as the plot gun, because it does literally feel like it is responsible for so much of what's happening in these moments.
It does.
To the same degree that we were talking about the way that, these books were written kind of out of order, this feels like one of those things where Sanderson had this idea here, went back, wrote the other book, because he had this idea for the allomantic balls that have the trigger inside to work as grappling hooks. And he's like, well, just give him a basic grappling hook in the first book, and then we'll figure it out. He'll get to the other one. Kind of an interesting thing, a unique thing when you start with book 2 instead of book 1.
Yep. That numbering system I'm still going to disagree with, but...
Well, yep. I mean, okay. When you write book 1, and then you write book 3, and then you write book 2, and then book 4. I mean, if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah, that's even more fucky.
Yeah, it's super messed up. Hey, I'm writing four books, and I wrote the first one, and then I wrote the third one, and then I wrote the second one, and then I ended it. All right. So it's great, too, that Sterris here is really excited about Wax and joining him in this moment, being saved and everything else. They make their way back to the train, landing and quickly catching up with the conductor, saying that bandits are still on board, installing something. It keeps some tension in this scene, in this moment, despite them having saved themselves.
Yeah, I appreciated the previous contemplation by Wax about the conductor specifically. It gets paid off pretty quickly, but he's wondering if the conductor is incapacitated or in on it, or is just trying to find the nearest city, which is ultimately what we land on. But just the why is the train not stopping kind of idea. I'll admit, even through this interaction with the conductor, I didn't trust him. I don't know why. I don't know. I was skeptical, given that we were faced with that contemplation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, too. I think that the story is kind of trying to point you in that direction, to give you a little bit of that skepticism, to be like, well, where did they come from? Right? Like, how did they... obviously they were riding up on horseback, and it was kind of unanticipated. And later we get a little bit of speculation where it's like, well, they didn't know you were there. Otherwise they probably wouldn't have done this to begin with, potentially. And there's some wishy-washiness there, which I think is a good setup to ask kind of the question of, who's in on it, who's not. But speaking of who's in on it and who's not, the slender man of whom threw the cube. We move over to Marasi, of whom confronts that same guy with a cane that Wax had seen earlier, but of course she doesn't know that it's this man, and that cube with the bizarre symbols on it is right there. After a brief and kind of ominous conversation, he scuttles away, and she shoulders her rifle, chasing after Wax and her stupid sister. What'd you make of this actual first verbal confrontation with this man?
This is some creepy shit, man. This is some creepy fucking shit. And like I said, based on the description, we get these sort of runic symbols on this cube. And we know of another magic system that uses runes, don't we? From Elantris. Mm-hmm. We also know that one of the prominent figures in Elantris is named Sereni. And we know that we're going to a city called New Saren, and it's all fucking connected.
You're doing full Charlie Day at the moment. Full Pepe Sylvia.
I don't know what to make of this, but that guy creeps me out.
I think that's an interesting point, though, about the runes themselves, right? It does beg a question of, especially considering this is a connected universe, you do immediately point to those other things, being like, well, could it be that? Could it be this? Could it be that? That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right.
Cool.
We go from there back to Wax, and he's back fighting this brute of a man and manages to launch them off of the train. Some of the other men start leaping off the train into the water, while Marasi engages her speed bubble to prevent those she's caught from leaving. This is kind of a clever turn of everything, kind of a clever use of capabilities. What'd you think?
Yeah, it's a bewildering moment, to be sure, of watching them just huck some of their friends off the train, like just yeeting them over the edge.
Into the water.
It's
even
wild.
The cane man. Yeah,
even the cane man. What the hell? Mm-hmm. Good on Marasi coming in clutch with that speed bubble. This also confirms for me that just being merely in proximity to that cube doesn't drain you of abilities. There's some sort of activation that has to happen because she is close to it and still has her metal reserves.
Mm-hmm. Right. She walked right next to it, so that does give us a little bit of information about that cube.
Mm-hmm.
As though maybe the charge is extended or something.
Yeah. Was like duralumin, where if you're burning a metal, it all burns up really quickly, powerfully. Was Wax burning his steel when it all went away?
Yeah, because he was rattling the doorknobs, right?
Right. Yep.
And then came around the corner and he was getting ready to go when the cube landed next to him because he was preparing for the brute to be there. Yeah. However, the brute does push eventually. The question is we didn't really see, did the brute maybe down a vial or something like that in the interim?
Yeah. Interesting. So I don't know. Maybe it's emitting some sort of mist like essence of metal that can be burned in proximity. I don't know. I'm bouncing ideas off the wall. I have no idea.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense to me. It can work. Cool. So we're back in chapter 9 then. The opening of this chapter, I think, is really brilliant. It starts with just such a great line. It's better than some of the first lines in most of the chapters in most of his books, but it's just such a punchy one. Wax had never shot a doctor before, but he did like trying out new experiences. That's so good.
It's wild.
That is such a perfectly off the wall line, especially for Wax and knowing Wax as a character. Like this, this could be the intro to Wax's like geriatric life, right? Like he's literally been hospitalized. He's 75 years old or 65. I don't know how people old live in this time frame. And, he's going to shoot a doctor. I adored it. I don't know. It hit me. Anyway, getting to the core of it, we're introduced to the Constable of Ironstand quickly, who introduces us to the villains of the last couple of chapters, the Night Street Gang, of whom has grown more bold in recent history, especially as they attempt to steal a house's payroll. House Ikril, I think, or Ikril or something like that. He also gives us a name to look out for. Donnie, and that he's Kolos blooded. He uses a term to address him, Kig, I want to say, or something like that.
Something like that. That term?
I mean,
or just in
the
general?
idea of like using it in general. I don't know. What'd you think?
I mean, I guess it would make sense to have another term. Koloss blooded is a little bit not only a mouthful, but also kind of clinical and kind of weird to describe someone. So having a more generalized term for it makes sense to me. It doesn't seem to be being used. It doesn't seem like it's being used derogatorily in the moment.
Kind of felt like it was.
Did you?
Yeah, I kind of got the context that it was. Not that that's crazy, like, or anything like that. I'm not saying that this is anything to bend over backwards for, but it did, to me, feel.
It felt like the term thug, talking about pewter burners.
Evilest rusting kig. You know, that's a fair point. He's putting adjectives in front of it as opposed to describing kig as something bad. It's a good point.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a single instance. It's hard to really know. Yeah.
That's a fair point. We really don't have more than that.
Yeah. But there are a fair number of differences between the Night Street gang and what we've experienced here. As mentioned previously, Donnie, the Koloss versus the big fucking dude we were fighting before. Probably not the same guys. And just a lot of really weird differences, and the premonitions that Wax has about these guys robbing the train and something being off. Like there's just a lot not quite adding up. Yeah, don't know if this is like intentional misdirection by this guy or if it's just an educated guess on what's happening based on what's been going on in the area. It's hard to know.
I feel like educated guess is a decent summation. Like, I feel like that's reasonable. I think that he has evidence that these people are that gang, but maybe there's something different about them in addition to that. Or maybe they're flagging themselves as that gang, you know? You don't see the leader or anything like that.
Earlier in this era, we got situations where it was a gang kind of co-opted by another entity.
Right.
Sort of hard to parse the motives when it's two people acting in conjunction, or two groups acting in conjunction. It's kind of muddying the waters there.
What's interesting to bring that up, you know, if this is the Sets gang, that means that they're trying the same thing in multiple facets, and you can imagine that they're probably doing that across Ellendale and the Ellendale Basin at large. Like this is not unique,
right?
That they're funding this underground crime ring. Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he's still searching the remnants and wreckage for Wayne and Milan when he stumbles upon some moving allomantic lines, finally. He's been kind of looking this entire time throughout a lot of this section. He enters the room and find Milan and Wayne there mid-post, potentially not at all coitus. You know, there's like, here's the context. Wayne and Milan are getting it on in some way, shape, or form. I think that's an interesting thing to talk about, and we should definitely have that conversation. But I do want to talk about what I think is more directly kind of pointed at in this scene, which is Marasi's interrogation of them after the fact. So whichever way you want to handle those, pick a direction. We'll go one, and then we'll go with the other.
Yeah, so talking about Marasi, I don't know exactly what to make of her hostility in this moment. I don't think it's necessarily her developing like a modicum of feelings towards Wayne, and this is like jealousy acting out. I don't think that's it, but I could see it going that direction. But more so what I'm thinking is she feels like she should have a sense of control over what's going on around her, and this is something completely out of her control, very obviously. She's dedicating her time to finding them, and they're fucking in the bathroom or whatever you want to call it. So there's frustration.
It's a luggage cart.
I know. Just, I guess there's a lot of stress in the situation at large, and she is not able to control this factor, and that's frustrating. I don't know what to make of it. I don't think it's feelings based, but I could see it kind of pointing that way.
I think I'm with you for the most part here, right? Like I agree with you that it is, I mean, at its very core, it is some feeling, but I do not think that it's a romantic one. I think it's almost one of like, well, why didn't you tell me that you were interested? Or like, why didn't you share that with me? Because we're so, especially with Wayne, Wade is so like almost brutally honest and open to a degree. Like, you talk about characters or people that are open books. Wayne is kind of an open book in every facet. If you ask him, or like if he has anything on his mind, he cannot help but say it out loud, which is a problem for him in a ton of different circumstances. So
that's true.
He's like the definition of a lack of decorum. And so the fact that he's even attracted to Milan, or that he's going on this kind of bend there, isn't a problem, I don't think, for her necessarily, outside of maybe the lack of honesty. There could be a little bit of jealousy there. I can definitely see that, but I don't know that it's jealousy so much. Potentially, this is a bit of a stretch, and you can push back on this. I don't know if it's jealousy so much about the fact that it's Wayne being with someone else, or it's the fact that maybe she isn't with someone else as well, or that she doesn't have someone else because she had that desire towards Wax. That's pushing it a little bit, but
that's pushing it. But I think that's more reasonable than a direct feeling.
Yeah,
sort of situational jealousy.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of putting it. I definitely agree with that.
I can buy it.
All right, so let's talk about what they were actually doing. I'm a believer as it relates to a little bit of the context that we get later when they talk about what they're doing, that they are snogging, as they say multiple times. Snogging is a British word for like kissy, touchy, feely stuff, but basically not intercourse. So where'd you land on it?
That feels like a cop-out backpedal answer. And like using post conversations to overwrite what we clearly see is happening. Like, I think they're fucking.
Okay.
I don't know. That's where I landed on it. And I think the snogging comments are there to give an air of plausible deniability in Brandon's own mind.
This is where some of the times there's like that line between like what's headcanon, what's actual canon. And the reality is that headcanon often just wins out, because it's like, that's the whole point of reading, is like what you imagine, right? Or like what you take away from something. It's that whole death of the author thing, right? Where you can, as long as you extract from the art what you extract from listening to it without the context from the author or otherwise. And you know what? I can totally see it. I totally saw it the first time. It wasn't until this read through that I picked up on the fact that they're definitely, I don't know if they're downplaying it so much as, like you said, Brand's trying to explain it away. But they also could be downplaying it. I don't know. I think that both of those characters are too honest and lack the ability to be embarrassed, really, though, that, you know, outside of egregious circumstances. But is this like an egregious circumstance? Like, Wayne gets embarrassed every once in a while, but I don't know.
Yeah, but they're not necessarily lying when they say it was a good snogging session. Like, that can lead into more.
Yes. Here's an added thing that I just thought about, right? And it's thrown me through a different window. Wayne can use speed bubbles. How long were they going at it?
The other thing is there's a fair amount of movement that Wayne notices.
Wax.
Yeah. Or Wax. That Wax notices through the metal lines. I don't know. Signs point to fuck.
Okay. All right. Needless to say, it's up for debate. Just giving you shit. Yeah, I just, you know, can I give Brandon credit for like leaving something so ambiguous? I don't know. At the very least, like,
I don't think so, though. Here's the thing. He could have left it without mentioning, like, talking about it from both characters' points of view, and it'd be more ambiguous now, like that way. But it felt like he had a moral need to say that they weren't having sex. Like, it felt overly readdressed after the fact that I don't think was necessary.
Oh, I agree that I don't think it was necessary. I think it would have been actually better to leave it ominous as opposed to even address it in the first place and like make you ask the question. Having like one off mention of snogging versus three is like also using the term snogging.
No, guys, they totally weren't. They totally.
Yeah.
They are pure in God's eyes yet.
Yeah. I mean, Milan's really old. You want to think about that for a second. Like, Milan is really, really old. And
Harmony is she's actively involved in this conversation.
He's actively involved in this conversation. Also, God damn it. She's also wearing the body of a 16-year-old.
Oh, fuck. That's gross. I didn't catch that part.
That's assuming that it's the same body, but when they go into the hotel, I don't assume that she changes between A and B, but she does ultimately like fill things out, and I don't know, whatever. I don't know. She's a very ancient being. How does one evaluate that? I don't know. I would have never approached that with a 10-foot pole if I were Brandon, but putting the age on the bones that she was wearing in that moment in this scene.
Yeah, it's weird.
Not the bones that she wears all the time necessarily, but yeah. Anyway, at the very least, there's no question. But even though she's wearing those 16-year-old bones, I think you've got the inverse question of like, you're sleeping with a mortal.
Yeah. Chris Hansen's like waiting in the wings. He's not sure if he's going to pop out yet.
Yeah. This is some Lysander bullshit again, all over again. All right. Okay. So, we move on from there. We then get to a second interrogation of the cube and to kind of talk about it a little bit, as well as the fact that we're reminded, or perhaps introduced, if you haven't read the back of the book, to what leechers are inside of this world, chromium burners who can remove allomantic reserves from people as though they're burning aluminum at a distance. Wayne has a line here about the cube shooting bullets that is so stupid it's funny and proper, and I had to add it, and it's so good. So... And if they could shoot the rusting thing, the bullet would be as small as a flea. Marasi sighed. Wayne, can't you let a joke die? Han, that joke was already dead, he said. I'm giving it a proper burial.
Yeah.
It's so good. The proper burial line is just perfect. Because we, as mentioned many a time, do the triple joke. And it's like we go one joke too far, and it's like, you killed it. Yeah.
Commitment.
I mean, that works. I'm in. Okay.
Yeah. We talked about leechers off air, I think. We talked about them earlier this episode, but I think we talked about them off air when we were talking about the Ars Arcanum for Shadows of Self. I don't know if that ever made it to the podcast.
I don't know either, but yeah, anyway.
Whatever. Yeah. But anyway, Wayne's commitment is unparalleled.
Truly unparalleled. And honestly, the best joke that he's told this whole book so far is right there.
It simultaneously the best and the worst.
Yeah, right.
It's so bad that it's good. It is
truly paradoxical. Wonderful. So we move from that scene into Wax approaching a nervously needleworking Sterris, and he tries to soothe her nerves, but giving a little bit up about himself. He's always felt lost in those social situations that she does so well in, and that it's okay for her to feel lost in these moments too of action and everything else. She leans over in this kind of heartfelt moment in which they talk about this exciting thing, and she kind of dozes off and falls asleep tucked into his shoulder. And it's kind of adorable.
It is adorable. If you can't tell yet, I'm really liking Sterris and Wax's relationship this week. This passage is absolutely no exception to that rule. It's more full, more fleshed out, and better than it has been the entire fucking series. So I'm happy with it.
I mean, it's a focus point now, right? Like the idea is that in the first book, it was kind of off-putting. In the second book, it was kind of coming to terms with reality. And now it's making it work, I'd argue progress marks.
I'd argue it's been one-dimensional up until this point. And now there's actually complexities and depths, and the characters are wrestling with the sort of paradoxical nature of their situation, in that it is strictly bound by contract and for political gain, but there are feelings and there are like good things that are coming of it, and they seem to benefit from each other and actually need each other more and more often as the story's going on.
So the first book, I mean, yeah, it's meant to be, it's not even, it's a non-factor almost. It's a necessity, right? In the second book, I think it does start to level up a little bit in the consideration and the way that she genuinely gives nods, and it starts to build Sterris out as more of a character, and so that starts to unpeel here. But yeah, you're right. I guess in the focus, this is where it really comes into center frame, right? It was very peripheral before, but now it is at the core of it. It's a crux of these characters. I can also, this gets back to something that we've been talking about quite a bit, and I don't think it's fair to judge these books based on this notion, but having to write the third book before writing the second book, if you already wrote like an emotional arc for them coming together, makes it very difficult for you to go back and like fill that out appropriately. You know what I mean? Like it just makes it hard to put in more than, passing worth. And I think he does a good job by instead choosing to explore, Lessie basically throughout that book, which makes sense. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Cool. With that, let's get on with chapter 10. Wax wakes up with a start, thinking he's hearing explosions, when in fact, it's the sound of waterfalls. I love the description here that it seems almost a little man-made, and the subsequent line from the conductor, I often think that Harmony was showing off a little when he made this place. They pull into the terraced and tiered city of New Saren, and honestly, it seems pretty cool. Their hotel is up in the top tier, which is a long way away from where they are, down in one of the bottom tiers on this car that basically just got them there. And so he and Marasi take a quick flight through the air in which we get to explore the city along with them.
This is a part that I personally struggled with, and it's simply because I am not good at imagining things, especially at large scales like this. This sounds really cool. I just can't see it. I just can't conjure it.
The picture of the waterfalls or the city?
All of it. The entire sort of cityscape that's opening up in front of them. The layout of the city as it's just like it just isn't as sort of majestic as it's being described to be.
I don't know if the city is necessarily majestic.
The entire view, the whole thing is described as what was the term? What was the quote? Harmony was showing off a little when he made this place. Like that just I wish I could imagine it better. I wish I could conjure it, because it seems like a really cool experience.
Yeah. And I mean, there definitely is something to be said about the, taking it all in and kind of considering the way that it is. I'll tell you what, I just did a quick Google just because I was curious. It is fascinating what the pictures are for people's imaginations of New Saren as drawn. I'll throw it in there in our little chat here. Because this is not even how I pictured it. I did imagine the canyons, that are carved through by the river and whatnot, but this is even further. And the tiering is such that it is much more dramatic than I imagined.
That's really cool, though.
Yeah, looks neat. So yeah, I imagine something more, PJ, just to give you perspective in the way that my brain went with it. I imagine something more like Niagara Falls, and then they were kind of coming up over and into the city, and then the city was built into the cliff face and tiers. I didn't imagine also waterfalls with the tiers necessarily.
Gotcha.
I thought the water was just underneath, and then they were kind of coming up from the riverbed. But
okay.
So yeah, okay. Anyway, it's neat. And then obviously all of those feed the river, which is fascinating. Oh, to the point of me just being completely incorrect, PJ, in the beginning of this book, there's a map. The map is of New Saren, and it does kind of paint a cleaner picture of the idea of this tiered with waterfalls going in between it. Needless to say, it's a cool image in the front of the book to kind of give you the idea of, what it looks like. So
yeah, you should check that out if you haven't. Dear reader.
You also have it in the audiobook if you were unaware. So unless maybe audiobooks.com doesn't have the PDFs available for you to access, but
nope.
Okay, well,
or I haven't explored them. They might. I don't know.
Likely true. I can't believe you haven't just switched over to my Audible account. Like we're double dipping.
Yeah. Okay.
You say that every time.
I know.
Love you. Okay. After they land, they note that Wax sticks out among the crowd. Marasi wants to invite Wayne on a grave robbing adventure, but Wax is immediately distracted from the prospect of finding the spike, as well as the reasons that they're out there to begin with, and starts to take off towards the mansion that he believes Suit to be in because of a symbol left in the newspaper. It seems to be calling to him like a calling card of a previous person that he defeated that Suit would be very aware of. I believe there's a fuller name for this man, but he's colloquially referred to as the Ape or something like that, very close to that. So, yeah.
And I think it's kind of alluded to that he was like tortured by this guy and like held captive or something. The conversation gets cut off, but like,
yeah. So there's a lot that's going on inside of this moment, which includes there's no way that the Ape would work with Suit, and there's no way that he would, because Marasi kind of interrogates and asks him. He's like, well, why? And it's like, no, this has to be a sign, basically, not that the Ape is here, but that Suit is here, because he knew that I would see this, is the read that I get from it, at the very least. Like, this is not a go stop a random dude. This is he's calling to me.
Yeah, I'm just saying that there's sort of a partial conversation that happens talking about what happened between him and the Ape.
Oh, yes.
And it seems sort of captured, held, and tortured kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
cuts off before there's any specific details let.
Right. Marasi stops him, right? And then decides to bring up the rest of the crew to convene before they make any kind of brasher decisions to rush off, like you're saying.
Right. You and I, yesterday, with our mixology tier, had our community night in which we watched The Graveyard Rats from Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. Right? Cabinet or cupboard? Cabinet.
The cabinet. Yep.
So I am all in on a grave robbing adventure right now. So that was exciting for me.
I hadn't even thought about that connection until I reread it today when I was going through and reading the notes. And
Same.
And then I was like, oh shit, we did literally just watch a thing about grave robbing. This is very timely. And I mean, we're recording this on Halloween, by the way, folks, if you didn't know, we're lame. It's a Monday.
Happy Halloween.
So happy Halloween, or belated Halloween, as it were. But
yeah, it's not Halloween for you anymore. It's fucking November or some shit.
Not quite. I have another hour. How dare you?
I mean, whoever's listening right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Fuck you. Again, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that. Someone sent me a message somewhere that said, hating your listeners, the key to making more listeners. They were definitely kidding, but they understood that it was a joke, thankfully. Please understand it's a joke. Yeah. So absolutely. I'm just so in, like, I don't know why that short totally did get me amped up for grave robbing being like a really exciting prospect. And inside of the story, I think it's wonderfully executed as far as we see it go this week.
Mm-hmm.
So they check into their hotel, and Wax immediately busts a window, like practically immediately. He like gets into the room. He's pointed out. They'd say that it's been painted over and closed because it was expensive and it was rattling and it was loud and blah, blah, blah. Wayne starts eating the peanuts immediately. Sterris is giving a list of potential events, including explosions and all kinds of other possible mutilations, like a cattle stampede. And then Milan asks what she should put on. And she absolutely means a skin suit and not necessarily how to dress, as she is like considering different breast and bust sizes to wear.
Yeah, she's just talking about tits.
Yeah. And to be honest, from an outsider, like Auntie, whatever her name is, Auntie, this is an absolutely crazy, chaotic moment.
Yeah, because it is. It's absolute insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is a fire sale of crazy people.
Milan's conversation is just so brash but funny, talking about the utility of being able to swap out different breasts for running versus seduction versus whatever she's doing. And it shakes things up, obviously. I thought it was ironic. Maybe not ironic, but maybe missing the point a little bit for Wax, or for Wayne to say Wax never learned how to blend in with a crowd when he's wearing his mist cloak, very obviously trying to stand out in the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was a little bit previously to the previous section, but I mean, regardless, I mean, that fits. It's within this chapter still. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing. They are very much like the odd people out in a big way.
That would be around the same time as the like sharks in the water, or the predators and mammal, whatever the conversation about how people avoid lawmen like fish avoid sharks. Just, I don't know, commentary.
That was a great analogy. I totally didn't bring that up, but that was one of my favorites. Or the as simple as the metaphor is, a bullet hole in a stained glass window, you know?
Yeah.
That was around the same section that I found that to be very well executed. I will say, I think that a number of Brandon's short metaphors here that he uses kind of in world feel the best that they have in this book. Like, this feels like some of the best writing in the series in moments. And then at times the characters feel like the worst versions of themselves, specifically Wayne. I'm just mostly bummed about the way that Wayne's been treated in this book so far, but it's good that he got put on his ass.
Sorry to completely shift gears here.
Yeah.
And before I lose it, I was just staring at the cover of the book.
Yep.
And looking at the name, The Bands of Mourning, and thinking about how there was the sort of idea that just being in the presence of the bands of mourning could affect you power-wise, and now we're dealing with that with this cube. Sorry, had to make that connection before I lost it altogether. So,
did you want to explore that more, or did you just want to make sure that you stated it out loud?
Just wanted to state it out loud, so I cemented my memory of it, which isn't necessarily always going to happen. But it's a better chance of happening if I actually say it, and keep that in mind while I read the next section. But I think there's some mechanic that's similar between the two.
That is an interesting point, and it does bring up something that maybe we'll explore in the near future. The drink, I added a couple of ice cubes to, just to, chill it out, water it down a little bit, and it looks like yellow Gatorade now, or like lemonade.
Yellow Gatorade?
I mean, green, yellow, whatever yellow.
Oh, the yellow Gatorade one. Yeah.
Yellow. Yeah, it looks like yellow Gatorade. I'm not crazy.
Maybe it's your camera. That looks way more dull. Really? Yellow Gatorade to me looks so vibrantly kind of yellow.
Oh, sure. It's not quite that, but it's pretty lemony in appearance. But I blame the pineapple mostly. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Moving on, the chapter ends with them going in their disparate directions for a nap, one side of the party to the party later this evening, and another for a spot of grave robbing. So that's where we end.
Yeah. There's the great line from Milan, "I'm just around for the punchy, stabby, as opposed
to shooty, go a little wacky. Or
that's the one. Yeah. They just kind of devolve into some delirious pre-nap conversations, because how else do you get out the silliness but by wacky conversation?
Yeah. It's very funny. It's not even Marasi that says that, or is it?
That's Wax and Wayne.
Yeah, it's Wax and Wayne that say that.
Yeah, it starts with Milan, but
yeah, Milan doesn't exactly pin it on that, but Wax is the one that breaks down to that first, which I think is the funniest bit, because it is literally a verbal tick for how tired he is, how exhausted he is.
It is Milan first. She says, "I'm just here for the punchy, stabby.
Oh yeah, she does. Fuck, you're right. My bad.
Yeah.
Damn. All right. I want to give Wax credit there.
Nope.
All right. Cool. With that, we go into chapter 11. Wax and Sterris pull up to the mansion and have a little discussion about the party they're about to crash. I do love that Sterris is trying her best, and in all of the ways that she knows how, to guide Wax through this party with her little notebook of flowcharts and conversations. I'm summarizing a lot here, but we do experience a lot of exchanges about the relationship inside of the cart, and sort of more of that relationship growth that we've been harping on is the wrong thing, but that we've kind of been banging the drum for over the course of this week.
Yeah, and this is, again, no exception. This just continues it. It makes me feel warm and happy. And do you know what that makes me think?
What?
Sterris gonna die soon.
Oh, no, Sterris cannot die.
Now that I'm starting to like her. Starting to like the relationship that's got to get ripped out from under me sometime. That's my leading theory at the moment.
Okay. All right. That's sad. I understand
that.
I do. I mean, I love the idea of this flowchart through conversation. I feel like as a kid, I actually thought this way a lot because I thought that I was very awkward. And I was very awkward. That's not actually something that we should directly address. I was very awkward. And then eventually, suddenly in 10th grade, was like, I will no longer be awkward and I will refuse to be. And so I stopped. It didn't necessarily change, but at least I talked to people more. So it was different. Anyway, I appreciate that, from almost like a juvenile perspective of understanding, that sort of difficulty. That said, I do want to be a massive advocate for flowcharts. I love flowcharts. I love them in everything I do. I actually very recently, at the recommendation of a small D&D podcast that I listened to, drew up a flowchart for my action economy for my monk for our campaign so that I always know all of my options at any time.
That's awesome.
It's amazing. I love it. It's like 4 pages of like, if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that, and then like cascading off of those. Like, if you do this, then these are your options for your bonus action. Then these are your options for your free action. Then here's what you should do with your movement. And here's your totals. Update your totals at this level mark. And I did it for everything through like level 14.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Because I'm crazy.
But I should do something similar to that.
I can only imagine how much harder it would be for a full-on spellcaster. It's still very possible because it's just action. What's the spell do? What's the spell? Cast it at this level. What's it do? At additional levels, add whatever the D damage is, and etc. But yeah, anyway. Righto. But I love a good flowchart. On their way to the door, though, they run into a beggar. And, well, it's better that I just read the quote. Oh, my lord, I know it. I own the place, technically. Now, regarding those coins for old Hoyd, my good lord, Wax, of course, hands him some coins, the beggar about to go get a drink for himself. But curiously, the beggar Hoyd throws his change precisely at Wax. And I love that he even calls it change because he's like, you've been too generous, and throws it back before he cackles and runs into the shrubs.
Yeah, so he gives him a $5 bill or something. Like, he gives him a note. And then he gives him change back.
Yeah, you're right.
And then gets chased off by the guard. But there's no comment around the fact that Wax has met, interacted with, and employed Hoyd before. So is this a new face? That's a pretty uncommon name that just kind of got like not acknowledged. Like, are we supposed to think that Wayne has that much disregard for his employed peoples? He seems to care about them and has interacted with Hoyd, and in his perspective said Hoyd, the new coachman.
Did he last a long time? I do want to mention here that at the very least, what was the guy's name? The other new steward, basically, who was helping out in. There was a good joke that happened, I want to say, in Iron Stand about the new person who was helping out instead of the employee. It started with a D. His name was like Durwer.
Iron Stand?
Well, it's not just an Iron Stand. He's kind of a recurring character throughout this, and he kind of comes up as a bit, basically, where it's like, well, you do know what happened to the last guy who had your job, right? Like he exploded.
I'm missing things. What is Iron Stand?
Iron Stand is the city that they stopped in on the way to New. That's where they switched.
Oh,
trains.
I thought you meant in another story.
No. In this story.
Okay.
In this story, in this week's reading, even. His name was it Dryle? No, that's not right.
I don't remember. But yeah, there was a comment about the coachman.
Yeah, so that whole guy has this whole bit about like, well, you don't know what happens to like people who are employed under Wax, like, ooh, maybe we shouldn't tell him. Like, there's a good joke between like Marasi and Sterris and Wayne in a moment that kind of surrounds him, and then later he's being like the constable is taking care of him, and like he requires like 4 people to help him or something like that, which is just absurd. Anyway, very funny. That said, like he's a dude. Do you think that Wax pays attention to every person all the time? And maybe he wasn't in his employ for long, you know?
Maybe not. I don't know. The name Hoyd is...
Than you think?
I don't think so. I really don't.
Really? What's the name Randall Flagg mean to you?
Randall's the shady shapeshiftery character in Monsters Inc.
He is indeed. Good call. Good call.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on like Hoyd and this whole situation here?
Well, there's the coin that he gets, which is obviously important. We'll get into that later. Specifically, it is not one of the misprints from before, right?
Yeah, it's not. It's a completely different coin. Yeah, because you think Wax would have recognized it as one of the misprint coins almost immediately,
right? Yeah, and it doesn't even look like money. It looks like a challenge coin or something.
Right, because the guard actually throws it, or not the guard, the bartender later throws it back.
Right. So, I don't know. I'm expecting it to be a piece of metal that's not one of the metals known. Like, it's an example of that. I've got ideas about Hoyd. I think he's Trell, and I think he's, I don't know, I guess this comes up later, but I think he's scoping out Wax and, like, trying to learn things about the mechanics of the world. Like, I think... We'll get into it. We'll get into it later.
Okay. I'm typing it here at the very least because I'm going to keep this as a prediction. We can rectify those later.
I think it is. It is a prediction. Later.
I'm pretty sure it was too, but I just wanted to make sure that I had at the very least not one of the metals known for the coin, which is inside of this section, not really the other one.
Right.
Cool. After being forced to check his weapons at a hat check, we cut over to Wayne and Marasi and a bank. Wayne builds up a whole lot of this plan in his head, and I think it's really wonderful the way that he's like going through all these different steps. And Marasi just reveals them straight off and that they're there to investigate, and Wayne's reaction is literally priceless. It is so funny. This is one of the, again, I laughed out loud twice this week. You mentioned the first one, which was the moment in which the shotgun blasted Sterris off. This is the other one where he is just so flabbergasted by just being like, yeah, and he goes, that's cheating, as stupid as that is. It's so good because Wayne has these truly quixotic plans.
This is such a stupid fucking word.
Stupid dumb word. I hate it. It should be quixotic. But quixotic plans, and it's just so great to see one of those just be absolutely foiled by a badge and some leather.
Yeah.
Of course, while they're inside of that room, a telegram arrives, and that telegram is also very funny, saying to watch Wayne very closely. After evaluating the ledgers from the bank, they determine who to hire to help them rob graves and leave, trading a rat tail for a shot. This is just a very great scene, front to back. Yeah. What do you think?
The rat tail was hilarious. 2 hands long, longest rat tail he's ever seen. Almost criminal to throw it away. Like, I don't know.
It's a payoff from an earlier bit, right? Where he's like, I gave him a rat for this, but without the tail, right? Marasi says, and then the tail shows up here.
Yeah. It's a fair trade, for sure. Absolutely. They're becoming a fun dynamic duo as well, the two of them, and like obviously foils of one another to a certain degree, but Marasi's got some comedy packed away as well, so it's cool.
Yeah, everyone is kind of, this book is very much like a coming into their own for the most part, except for Wayne, of whom really hasn't had that same kind of growth arc necessarily yet. That said, he's been humbled a couple of times and stuff like that has happened, and obviously there was a ton of exposition in the last book that gave us a ton of weight to that character.
Yeah, but we've come to understand his character, but his character hasn't evolved a lot.
Right. And this is one of those great moments where it seems like they're becoming buddy, right? This is where I push back against the idea about it being a romantic interest necessarily, and more one of like casual disappointment that she wasn't informed of, like, well, we have an existing friendship. Like, why wouldn't you talk to me about that? So the disappointment is different, but palpable.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Cool. All right. We go into our final chapter of the week, PJ. I'm not going to lie. It is crazy to me that we are at 2.5 hours right now in our recording.
Yeah.
And that's without the Breaking Devil, or that's with the Breaking Devil's cut. It's wild. We haven't recorded an episode this quickly in months, half a year, maybe. I don't know that we've had this short of a recording in a long fucking time.
Maybe it's the drinking.
Could perhaps be.
Who would have thought? Intoxicating ourselves makes us go off track and take wildly more time.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, with that, we go into chapter 12. We move into this next chapter, starting off in the room. Sterris sends Wax off for drinks, and in the room, I really kind of mean to say in the room where it happens, this party room that we find ourselves in this mansion, and he gets wine for Sterris and a G&T for himself. And the bartender is taken aback that he's asked for only a G&T. A G&T is a fine drink, Brandon. It is a refined cocktail. It is a perfected cocktail. It is simple, sure, but I've never met a bartender that's been disappointed for making a G&T.
Unless you're talking like rail G&T.
Do you think that Wax is ordering
rail gin
G&T?
and Sprite because they don't have tonic water for some reason?
But this is a fancy upscale.
No, I know. Yeah, that's fair. I don't know.
I'm just saying this feels like a small like nudge where I'm like, there's nothing wrong with the G&T. But then he pushes back in his own head and he's like, well, I could have just ordered whiskey if you wanted me to be the ruffian that you think I am. Anyway, of course, you still tip the man despite him insulting you. And after a philosophical observation, and the bartender gives him the coin back, thinking it a memento instead of the tip that he meant to give him. It matches the pictures that R'hllor had taken before, some of the symbols on it, and it is very clearly the medal that Hoid gave him earlier. What do you think about the coin? What connection do you think it has, or why give it to Wax to begin with? Why would Hoid choose to interfere here?
So, like I mentioned,
yeah,
not quite, actually. Lady Demu is where it gets into conspiracy quarter.
Okay.
But starting here, we get the idea that it's a different metal, like I mentioned. The idea that it's almost like a secret handshake or secret badge to get in somewhere, like, I don't know, proof of belonging, key, whatever you want to call it. Like I said, I think Hoid is Trell, and I think that much in the same way that Harmony has been using Wax throughout all of his life, Hoid hopes to do something similar, and this giving of this coin is like a first step in good faith rapport building for him, like trying to get a foot in the door sort of deal. Mm-hmm. Just kind of as a means of gaining trust and building a relationship, because apparently being his coachman didn't go well.
I mean, being slightly Cosmere aware, where do you feel like Hoid lands, between the stories, right? Like if you think about where you are between Elantris and here right now being the two stories, and my voice is just all of a sudden giving out. I'm going to take a sip of tea. Where do you land with Hoid, thinking about him in the spectrum of the universe?
I think he embodies a similar power as, I'm not sure, Harmony.
Okay.
But one of ruin or preservation. Like if he holds half of a power structure, sure. I could see that being a thing. But really, I don't have much to go on with that. I know he's able to travel through the pools, but presumably that's the Well of Ascension. But I guess we don't technically get confirmation of that. The one that he goes into at the epilogue, or like after the epilogue of Elantris, seems to be described the same way that the Well of Ascension was, but we don't technically know where he pops out.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. That all makes sense to me. So, after a brief conversation and some not deserved deprecation on Sterris' part, the pair make their way over to Lord Gave in Trone, and they share a little conversation intended to be practice for doing this again, and boy is Wax really rusty in his moments. And it doesn't go well at all for him as the pleasantries begin to give way to insults from Lord in Trone. What do you think of this whole thing?
I felt there was something really weird the entire time, because even before the pleasantries gave way to like direct insults, they were met with smiles and smirks and giggles from the other people that Wax didn't seem to have a grasp on why. Like it seemed like he was missing something. Like they were making fun of him slyly the entire time. So yeah. I don't know what to make of that. Maybe it's just them looking down upon him being a man of the roughs in the past, a lawman, but not actually a constable. Not like he didn't have a
formal badge or nothing.
Yeah. Like there's they're looking down their noses at him in such a way. But either way, Wax is irritable and makes a show of himself.
Mm-hmm. He most definitely does, and he gets so close. Like in any other circumstance, if he actually had the guns and he didn't have to check them at the door, which I don't know. I feel like I must have deleted my statement or accidentally skipped the thing about checking the guns, because I loved that.
It's there, but it's like half of a sentence.
Oh man, I love the fact that it's not that big of a deal, right? Which is why it is half of a sentence, but I do love that he has to check his guns and everyone else is checking hats and coats, and he's got 2 firearms to give up, which is very, very substantially different. So obviously this goes very poorly, as you had mentioned, and the sort of snickering that's going on in the background, and just the idea of the sort of natural resentment that's towards this man of the roughs, of whom is now in charge of the house, feels like it's something that Wax is, because of maybe the sort of yellow journalism of the era, going to have a very difficult time overcoming,
Yeah.
He's painted in a crazy light, despite being net beneficial, as anyone with any kind of real education knows, like Marasi.
Yeah, and this is the first interaction that we've had in story with the broadsheets, and specifically dealing with the stories that are told about Wax that we've read.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so
this is where that kind of comes into conflict, and it shows that difference between like real knowledge and like depth of knowledge with sources and truth versus like the clickbaity headline that you clicked and read and ingested as your source of illusory truth and information. So with that, Wax obviously fails out of that entire conversation pretty quickly, but then approaches the next one, given the guidance of Sterris and a seltzer instead of a full drink, or ordering a seltzer instead of another drink so that he can keep his focus with Lady Demu, and goes to the dance floor with her. He then dances around a little bit, of course, taking that dance card, and then is intercepted by a second mysterious woman who gives us some statistics on the world at large and answers a couple of questions you asked last week about the overall numbers here. And she also makes, and overall numbers meaning like population numbers, and she also makes our very first non-Ars Arcanum reference to the name of the region as Scadrial. I combed through every other book to make sure that this was true. This is the first reference that's to the Ars Arcanum or Arcanum Unbounded that Scadrial is referenced. So, with that in mind, what implications do you think their conversation has? Do you have any thoughts on who she is or why she's doing what she's doing? And what do you think of the conversation at large? Like, there's also that side of this, right? Like, there's predictions, which are fun, but also let's not miss the context of the thing.
Yeah. Welcome to PJ's Conspiracy Corner, where he asserts that this is Hoyd. Hoyd is a shapeshifter, which explains why he presented himself in a way that Wax wouldn't have recognized before outside of the building, and why nobody recognized her and her description going into the party later on when confronted. Other option is maybe a Khandra, but I like to believe that this is Hoyd. And Hoyd is, we know for a fact that there are pieces of knowledge and mechanics and things that Harmony is unable to know and doesn't know, and is actively seeking information on. So it's perfectly plausible that Hoyd doesn't understand the mechanics of these metallic arts and is kind of using this as a reconnaissance and research session to really gain a depth of information on the more intricate interactions of these different metals. So yeah, beyond that.
She also, I want to add this to your context, right? She also knows specifically before he talks that he is a crasher, a coin shot, and a skimmer, right? Like, she knows that combination, knows the name, knows all of it.
And knows that he's one of 3 so far historically that are that specific combination, which is a greater depth of understanding, which still could point to Khandra.
Yeah, I'm not pointing away. I was just adding that context of like, she knows way more than like, she is gaining knowledge for sure from this, but she already has a base of knowledge as well.
Yeah, but she's also seeking like why redshift doesn't occur in a speed bubble, There's just...
Which is interesting because we've actually talked about surface redshift before, right? Like the light redshift, which is what redshift actually is. So it's actually super hard to talk about speed bubble, since she's saying why doesn't redshift occur? Because that's how you explain the action refraction between the surfaces. So,
right.
But you can still see people. Yeah, it's this whole thing. Like, this could become a very complex conversation about redshift pretty quickly as it relates to the speed bubble and the visuals inside or outside of said bubble. I guess to be a belief shift.
Speed bubble? Which one's speed bubble? Because I thought Marasi's was referred to as a speed bubble.
So they're both referred to as a speed bubble, but because they affect the speed of things, right, in some way, shape, or form. The one that goes faster is Wayne's, or rather, excuse me, time around the bubble goes slower. Time inside the bubble remains relatively the same. Marasi's inside the bubble to the perspective outside of the bubble slows the time. Inside of the bubble is normal time. So the movements feel delayed despite them happening. So she is actually very technically on the inside of the bubble moving very quickly, right? Or very slowly.
Very slowly.
No, but she's moving at regular speed. Oh, no, she is moving very slowly. It just takes 15 minutes to pass on the outside. Yeah. Yep. Slowly. Yep. Yeah. There's your complexity for the week.
But they're both speed bubbles, technically.
They're both called speed bubbles.
That could have been referred to tightened up loosely.
A little bit. Well, in this book so far, they've loosely been referred to as speed bubbles. Yeah. So, yeah. Slow bubble, speed bubble would have been the way to do it for sure. But just to keep it clear. So we move back to Wax and Sterris after a brief check-in wink with Milan, and she has gotten him a drink, and it's either a lemonade or a soda. I know that they call it soda water, but still, it could be like a 7-Up or Sprite equivalent or like something else in that spectrum of drinks. I just found it this moment is very humorous to me, and like trying to make it make sense is fun because it's like there's just so much sugar in it that he's overwhelmed and he's like, it's poison because of how sweet it is, which makes sense considering his taste in drinks between the gin and tonic that he's had and the whiskey that he chooses to drink normally. Yeah. Anyway, he heads over to a conversation with Devlin Ayres, and that's where it cuts away from him for the week. So I guess, what are your thoughts on the drink?
So, couple thoughts. One, Sterris similarly makes a face about how sweet it is, but then when he looks over his shoulder again, it's half gone, and she's like pretending to be innocent about the entire situation. So that's kind of funny. But I got the impression that this was like a non-American lemonade, which is carbonated, typically outside of the US. Yes. So, and it's probably not universal, like most things, but I know like European lemonade, like if you order a lemonade, they'll give you something carbonated. So there's that. That's what I got off of it, but I could easily see it being something like Sprite as well.
Yeah. I think the sugar pointed me in the direction of something very sweet, right? And so like that's where I went with like a soda. It didn't seem like
clearly a soda of some sort.
Soda water, so it was sparkly. So yeah, it could totally be a European lemonade. That's a great point.
Yeah. Or maybe Australia. I can't remember. We served a lemonade. So we made our own sodas at one of the breweries I used to work for, and we did a lemonade, and it was carbonated because all of our sodas were carbonated. And we got comments all the time about how people that had traveled the world really liked our lemonade because it reminded them of foreign lemonades.
Okay.
But that's the extent of my understanding of the topic.
Sure. I mean, hey, that makes sense. It would be interesting to, at the very least, look that up and figure out a little bit more about it. So maybe next week we'll come at you with some lemonade knowledge.
Coming at you lime.
Yes, lemon. None of this was limeade. Moving on. So breaking this up into the other section, of course, that we end this week with, we go to Marasi and Wayne. We get a quick beat about the survivor and how the religion persists in part around this idea that the survivor himself broke the rules and always had, and that the doctrine explains that he was not dead, but surviving. Anyway, we come back to exploring this grave and looking at Deschamps, or Deschamps, as he's later referred to in many different ways. Wayne throws the hat on like a vagrant and works his magic on Marasi's clothing, dirtying her up a bit so that she didn't look so formal in the moment. At the end of all that, she noticed that she wasn't blushing.
So, first of all, what? No blushing? What? How could it be? But there's a few different times throughout this section where a character's emotions are explicitly pointed out as abnormal. There's one with Wax earlier on, and I can't remember exactly where it was, but it pointed me in the idea that he was being rioted and like actively having to calm himself down. And this feels almost like it could be pointed to that there's like a soother in the area, stunting those emotions. But maybe that's taking all agency out of a character's emotions, and I'm like trivializing it a little bit too much, or just being paranoid about things. But
I think you have every rationale to be paranoid inside of this, so I don't want to completely dissuade that necessarily. Comparatively, I do feel like from a character argument, you could make a stance because of the way that Wax explained it, that like he was genuinely angry in those moments. He could have been rioted. He could have been encouraged to be a little bit more angry. I don't think that she's being soothed. I think she's actually genuinely okay with this. As she started to, Marasi, as she started to change and be less afraid of who she is and who she presents herself as, and as she is more comfortable getting into different roles and stretching outside of it's this change from she was a student of law to now she's practicing law and needs to understand things that go into different moments. And so in some ways, I think that this is training. And so she's also, as a part of that, I don't know whether or not this is a good thing necessarily, she consistently works with men, and at the very least a man of whom looks a little bit demeaningly at women consistently. I mean, he never demeans the women intentionally, but he is a little bit gay, and that has previously been the source of a lot of her blushing. And so in this moment, she started to no longer find it risque. And I think that's the source of growth for me for her, is that she's okay with who she is, regardless of what she's wearing, you know, because she is still her, and she's playing a part, sure, in the moment, but I think it's a good thing. Net. So
the one sort of pushback I have on that, and maybe it's just a style choice that I disagree with or find odd, to know that she thinks she should be blushing here and like actively deciding, or like not deciding, but noticing that she's not, and that being a weird thing, is different than looking back upon something and saying, hey, in the past, maybe I would have been blushing at this, you know, like those are two maybe subtly different, but different scenarios in my head.
One requires a lot more internal monologue.
That's true.
No, I'm not saying that is like a negative thing. I'm saying that is not something that in this book series that Brandon has given a whole lot of time, is internal monologue in different moments from third person. So I definitely agree with you. I think that would be truly, to add clarity to this moment, that would be generally the delineation I'm looking for. But given the rules and the spectrum of things that we get, this is the best interpretation of how I see it. The fact is that we have to take a second to kind of interpret that, as opposed to it being clearer. So
that's fair.
I think that's kind of my takeaway, is like, yeah, I definitely agree with you. You could write this, you could change this to make it a little bit more clear in the moment. But I think to keep that in line with everything else, you would then have to change everything else because of the tone throughout and the way that it's structured and written. So
makes sense.
Unfortunately, you kind of set yourself up into a trap when you start with the tone and then have to keep it the whole time. Maintain some semblance of coherency between everything.
Oh, darn.
Oh, darn. Okay. So we end this week. Did you have any thoughts on like the makeup of the dress and like the whole scene where like Wayne cuts everything up? Yeah,
I mean, it was quick, but you're right. A little bit of sort of gross over sexualization of the situation on his part.
Funnily enough, I didn't actually find this moment gross for him in over sexualization, because I don't feel like he was doing it for a negative reason. I think that in general, Wayne can be gross in other moments, especially when he's like thinking about bust sizes and other. But there is the final beat in this moment that I think is what you're pointing to, in which he stares because he's getting into character. That is
I don't know if it's because he's
comparatively.
getting into character, though.
No,
That's
I agree
the
with
thing.
you.
That's
Yeah, right.
that's the excuse that he gives, but
Right.
that's
right.
a weak ass excuse.
True, for sure. I think everything else though was okay until that moment.
Right. That's fair. Yeah.
And that's like a miss. That's like a. But and the drummer lost the stick when they went for the cymbal. Like it just flew out of their hand.
He is consistently doing that, though. Like he did with Renette earlier. Like it was a very meaningful apology and conversation, and it just kind of falls flat in the last moment, and then makes a joke of it himself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if he's nothing if not consistent.
Consistently, just a little bit of a disappointment, which is the way my mother would describe me. All right. So, just kidding.
She's
They finally,
right.
Oh, well, I mean, at the very least, she can, live knowing that she's not the only one that thinks that.
Yep.
All right, so they finally meet up with this DeChamp fella, and he's easy enough to con to play on Wayne and Marasi's part. They make it very easy work of him, and they do make this great dynamic duo tackling this man through the use of like the terrorist language and her inability to understand. Obviously, she can, and him understanding the regional dialect and blending into it with age. They finally make it to the grave shortly thereafter, freshly done, and give it a turnover. And that's where this week ends. Like this comparatively is kind of an abrupt ending.
It is. Deschamps, however you want to pronounce it, is a pretty interesting fellow, but I thought the more interesting part of this was using that as a vessel to get more specifics on Wayne's process and how he changes his dialect slightly as a means of becoming more authoritative and more of a parental figure to this guy, probably. Just a very in-depth understanding of the history of dialects is always super fascinating to me. So cool to see that come alive even more here through his conversation with Marasi.
Does apprise himself as a little bit of a linguist, so that makes sense. I mean, throughout, and he definitely is playing with that through the idea of dialect and intonation and the way that Wayne really plays around with the idea of linguistic manipulation, which I think is really great here. Like you said, he's playing into that he's playing into the power of sounding a little bit older, like a parental figure. And so he's wielding that over top of him by just seeming just a smidge older when he changes the accent a little bit in the end. It's great. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And that's we're done. That's the week. PJ.
That's the week.
Shit. Wow.
We went into this thinking this would be one of the longest episodes. It ended up being not that.
I mean, it is in one of the fastest episodes we've recorded in the last 6 months. It's not a guest episode, which is wild. So,
yep.
Good shit. All right. So, with that, next week, we're reading The Bands of Mourning, chapters 13 through 20. Again, that's going to be 13 through 20. So, one less chapter this week, all told, than previously, but about the same page count as it goes between. So, we're going to bleed. We're going to finish part 2 and go well into part 3. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as always, to Tim and Andrew for helping us keep our show's lights on. You can find our links in the show notes where you can find our schedule, our Patreon, our previous episodes, our websites, and our social media accounts all in one very convenient spot.
In case you are blissfully unaware of our social media accounts on all of their various platforms, we are Words Whiskey Pod on Elon Musk's Twitter for the time being. We are on Instagram and Reddit at Words Whiskey Pod as well as Facebook. Words and Whiskey Show at gmail.com, patreon.com/Words and Whiskey, t-shirts on TeePublic. You can follow our link like PJ had mentioned. If you think that we should be on a different social media or interacting somewhere else, let us know. We would love to know what community circles and everything else you'd love to see more of us on, and or where you'd like to see us talk. So we're all over the internet. You just got to point us in the right direction. Especially with Twitter dying, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. It's been a very tenuous week for Twitter users so far. the couple of days, I should say. So we'll see where it goes. But Twitter's been our home. And so, you know,
I genuinely don't think anything's really going to change with it.
We don't need to talk about that necessarily. But what I will say, without talking about what may change or may not change, is I think that a lot of people aren't respecting the platform the same already to begin with, which is leading to somewhat of an exodus. And there's, at the very least, it is also pointing for me, as the person who does our social media, to be like, oh shit, what if Twitter goes away? Where would we go to talk with our listeners? And so what I would like to know is where we can speak with you best.
I've got a spot. It's a Discord, which you can join by going to patreon.com/words and whiskey.
Yes, also that. For sure that. I mean, most definitely that. I just mean, if you want to see stuff from us, where do we go? Where do we go? Mm-hmm. Do you want us on the Tiki Talkies? Because like, I can do it, but I don't want to. You know, like that's, I don't think anyone wants to see that. I think that's the other side of it for me. I don't think anyone wants to see the sad TikTok from me posting my books and being depressed. Just kidding. Anyway, we'll see you next week.
All right. Have fun. I'm going to go to sleep for a little while and then drive for a long time.
Yes. Sounds reasonable. All right. See you guys later.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.